Good morning. This is the lecture for European history for Thursday, the 13th of January 2021. And first, a few things about tomorrow and next week. Tomorrow, you will have an extensive quiz on early industrialism, and you will also get a study guide on the exam. The exam is going to be a combination of the quiz tomorrow and the exams that you've taken previously, maybe with a few quiz questions thrown in. Not Baker quiz primarily, but my quiz. So you should be able to have a fair shot at studying for this. The basic rhythms of life on the farm are dictated by the sun and by the seasons. These are called diurnal rhythms. And it is what most poor people were used to, dictating their lives. We don't use diurnal rhythms anymore. Not really, not in our society. Most of us in the wintertime get up before the sun and get home after the sun sets, whereas in the summertime, we wake up long after the sun rises and go to bed before the sun sets. This is not the way it was in the past. In the agrarian world, you worked long days in the summer, short days in the winter. In fact, Russian peasants were famous for basically semi-hibernating through the worst of the winter months, spending most of their time in bed in their huts. The rhythms of the clock are a jarring difference between the old world and the new. And the clock slices time into such fine bits that if you don't plan for it, you might not have any time to think or breathe or reflect. If you work in a town that has a mill or a factory, one of the things that's interesting is you get woken up everywhere in town by either a steam whistle or a bell or a siren or something like that. Something fills the valley with sound early in the morning to wake the workers and get them going so that they'll arrive at work on time. Of course, not everyone in the valley works in the mill or the factory, but that doesn't matter. Most do, and in any case, what are you going to do? It's in a world where people don't necessarily have their own clocks or their own alarms. That is probably the best way to do it. Some towns in America that are focused, that are old-fashioned, and still have mills or factories at their heart, like paper mill towns in Maine, still do that. It's rare, but it does happen. Now, you expected to work long hours if you were a farmer during the summer. So working from sunup to sundown, whenever that is, wasn't unusual. Early factories were built with very large windows because they weren't lit. The light came from outdoors, and you were expected to function with just a lot of outdoor light streaming in through the windows. But in Europe, which is as north or farther north than we are, you can imagine you end up with 14, 15, 16-hour days in the summertime. The 40-hour work week that we are used to here in the United States, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, was unheard of. People worked 6 days a week, usually at least 12 hours. Sometimes they reformed and had a 10-hour day, which was an improvement on a 12-hour day or a 14-hour day. But you worked to match the clock. And you know how you get bathroom breaks? No, you were expected to learn to discipline your body so that you wouldn't be disturbed during working hours. There were break times that you could use their facilities, but in general terms, you were expected to be at your workstation pretty much the entire time of your shift. In times of famine, in bad times, in the Middle Ages, the feudal lord was expected to work with and help his people. So if there was starvation, the lord would be expected to offer some kind of amelioration, if he was able to, some kind of charity, if he was able to, because we're all in it together. In good times and in bad times, I am their lord, they are my serfs, they are my peasants. I'm responsible by God for leading them well. So in good times and in bad times, Christian decency and the concept of noblesse oblige leads leaders to care for their followers to the extent they can be cared for. Remembering that even the Lord would suffer famine a couple of times a year. But this is not the case in the industrial world. First of all, I'm going to flip ahead to Ferdinand Lasalle's Iron Law of Wages. Lasalle argues that it is impossible for mill owners or factory owners to pay what they would like. I may be your employer, and I may like and care about you to an extent. You're my workers, and I may want the best workers I can get, and I may want to be big sugar daddy who is capable of giving you each a decent living and to feel good about myself. But if I pay you beyond the market rate, my goods are going to cost more to make because your wages are part of my overhead, like I have to pay for raw materials, like I have to pay a mortgage on the factory, like I have to pay for repair parts for new machines, for everything that includes transport of the raw materials and the product to market. Your wages are part of the overhead. And if I raise your wages out of proportion to what my competitors are doing, I have to somehow make up that money, which is almost impossible. The notion that companies, corporations, and rich people have all this money floating around to spare is communist nonsense. Factory owners had to run tight ships. A factory owner who paid better than market rate and couldn't find a way to balance that off in some way was a factory owner that was going to go out of business because customers who are buying sweaters are not going to spend extra for basically the same product just to make sure that the workers have a little bit more food on the table every night. That's not the way the market worked. And it really isn't the way the market works today, although today more people have extra money enough to buy name brand, to buy a product based on the reputation of the manufacturer. That hadn't happened yet. So Lasalle's Iron Law of Wages says that, bless you, everything that can be done to make the production line, tissues should be there, more efficient must be done in order to keep the factory competitive and to keep the factory in the game. There is not today in modern oil companies a giant reserve of money. Oil companies have to be lean in order to be competitive. And this is true of coal mining companies, and this is true of textile companies. This is true of everyone. If you have a business model that is flabby and fat, like me, you will go out of business. You have to be lean and athletic to compete. And that's a reality a lot of people who are envious and who deal in envy for political gain don't like to imagine. They assume that wealthy people are all sitting on their backsides eating bonbons all day, playing with piles of money, having money fights with one another. That's nonsense. Anyone who's in business knows, and anyone who's ever had to make a payroll knows, there isn't a lot extra. And the extra that you have is best folded back into the company. to buy better equipment to stay more productive and more competitive into the future. You do not ever rest on your laurels when you're in business. You have to keep advancing. It is a Darwinian struggle, survival of the fittest. And anyone who is incapable of functioning in that environment perishes. So in bad times, what do you do with your workers? When there's not a demand for your product, you lay them off. When you lay off a worker, it's not the same as firing. If I had to fire you, and I've done this, it's unpleasant, but it's necessary sometimes, I say, look, you no longer have a job, you're fired because you weren't keeping up with your responsibilities. Good luck, but I'm not writing you a reference, you're fired, take your things and leave. Unpleasant, but necessary, because you cannot keep workers that are incompetent or that are lazy or that are willfully negligent. That's a disservice to your customers. It's a disservice to the other workers, and it's a disservice to your stockholders. So when you lay someone off, you're saying you're a wonderful worker. I love having you in my factory. Unfortunately, there isn't enough business. So I'm having to lay off the entire second shift. And everyone who has seniority is going on first shift, and you just haven't been with us long enough to have that kind of seniority. I wish you the best. When we have work again, you bet I'll call you, and I'll hope you'll be able to come back. That's being laid off. And it still is a gut punch. It still means that you're not going to have the income that you need, that you're going to have to find some other way of putting food on the table and keeping a roof over your head. But it's not because you messed up. It's because the company simply does not have enough money, does not have enough business to justify your employment right now. It's never fun. I have been fired and I have been laid off. And I can tell you, both stink, but being fired is worse. So, in good times and bad, the medieval lord was there for his serfs and peasants. Not the case with factory owners and their workers. Factory owners simply cannot afford that kind of generosity. They lay their workers off, and when business gets booming again, they hire them back, or they hire back somebody else in their place. That's the deal. Why? Because businesses do not owe their workers. They owe their stockholders. Let me explain what a stockholder is. Let's imagine that I'm an entrepreneur. I have an idea for a product or a service. I'm going to make pillows. Our pillows. I'm going to produce a special kind of pillow for us. And our pillow, not my pillow, our pillows are going to be produced in America, and what it is ripped up memory foam, but it feels pretty good, and it's made in America. Here's the thing. I don't have the money to start a pillow factory. So I have to go around to banks and to wealthy people who have extra money that they want to invest and say, I would like to start a pillow factory. Here's my business plan. Here's why I think it'll be a successful business. Here's how I'm going to advertise it. Here's how I'm going to market it. Will you contribute money to my endeavor and become a stockholder? If the answer is yes, they will give me a certain amount of money to make it work. In return, they own a percentage of the company. That is called stock. Every 6 months or so, stockholders are going to get a check, which is a percentage of the profits equivalent to the proportion of stock that they own. Also, if the company rises in value, each stock that they own grows in value. When a stock really grows, it does something called splitting. It's like an amoeba. You've got one stock, and then each stock is so valuable, they split. And now you have two new stocks for the price of one. And if you own a lot of stock in a good company, every 10 or 20 years, the stock should split. So you can make a lot of money, both in terms of dividend checks for just keeping your money in the company. And if you sell stock, you're going to sell it, unless the business completely fails, at a higher value than you bought it. So I'm not asking for charity when I want money for my pillow company. I am saying I can make you money. Invest in my business. You will get a dividend check every 6 months. And if you sell your stock and my business is successful, you will make a lot more money. My duty is to them, because without those donors providing capital, who that communist Marx called capitalists, but who are really investors. Without investors, there is no new business. Without loans of money to entrepreneurs, to people with ideas, there are no new products. There is no technological advancement. There is stagnation. One of the problems of socialism and communism is that they tend to be stagnant. They don't tend to reward creative ideas. Free market capitalism does. So, in business, I, your boss, the manager, do not owe you, my employees, anything other than the opportunity to earn a living with reasonably safe and decent working conditions, if I can afford them. I owe my stockholders. I owe the investors who made my business possible. That's who I'm going to serve. That's my primary interest. So businesses always prioritize the stockholder over the employee, because the employee is a part of your product's maintenance costs. The stockholders are what made your business possible. Questions, comments, thoughts?
For Christmas, we got sent these My Pillows. They're horrible. I hate them so much. They literally are just chunky pillowcases. I feel like. And my brother, he's 3. You think he wouldn't? Well, he's almost 4 actually. Anyway, you think he wouldn't care about that? No, he took it out of the pillowcase and laid just on the pillowcase. He didn't like it at all.
That's funny. I will admit that a few years ago I spent $80 on a pillow because I was stupid.
It's so expensive.
And because I like the company. I like the guy who runs the company. But I have to admit, I only use the product when I'm in a certain frame of mind, because it isn't the most comfortable pillow I've ever had, although it's advertised as. So I get it.
Walmart pillows are more comfortable.
I'm not going to go that far. I appreciate your opinion. Other comments, David?
On Christmas, I got a pillow called a pillow cube.
Those.
Yeah,
how was that?
Oh, it was great. I love it.
Really? Are you being sarcastic?
No,
so the pillow cube actually works.
Yeah,
to me, it looks incredibly uncomfortable.
Yeah. To me, it looks really weird, right? And I was watching an ad, and it was describing the history of how people were trying to
support their heads while they're sleeping.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait, what is it?
It's a cubicle pillow. And is it soft or hard or
it's soft?
Okay.
But when you take it out, you have to give it 20 minutes to rise.
Okay, so it's like a loaf of bread. That's creepy and hilarious at the same time. Although I have to admit, if somebody got me a pillow for Christmas, unless I asked for it, I'd be a little weirded out.
Yeah,
I mean, there are other things I'd like. Yes.
It was expensive.
I believe it.
So my dad bought a My Pillow, and it was like a buy one get one. And so he wanted everybody else in the family to try the pillow. Nobody likes it, but nobody.
But who?
Even John can't sleep on it. Just my dad likes this pillow.
Oh gosh. See, yeah, that was what it was. I had a 2-for-1, so I got 2 pillows for the price of one. They really are an acquired taste. That's the nicest way I can put it.
I had to go get a pillow out of the closet that night because I just could not sleep.
Yeah. My sympathies to your dad. It's a terrible thing to love something and try to share it and have everyone go, it stinks! Been there, done that many times. Yes.
So people are complaining about all these pillows and stuff. I have slept on the destroyer because I went on a tech cruise a couple times in. Those pillows are something else. Those pillows and mattresses, they're like rocks.
Yeah, because they're not intended to become. Basically, if the Navy is doing it right, you're going to be so tired when you hit those racks, it won't matter.
Yeah.
You'll sleep because you have to. Look, you're lucky you're not in a hammock as far as the Navy is
I would
concerned.
rather be in a hammock. Yeah,
Hammock will probably have more space, to be honest.
It might. No, I've seen those racks, and there's like this much space.
Yeah,
So you can basically lay on your back, and if you're small, you can lay on your side.
Yeah, you get about amount of space.
Yeah, okay, that's bigger. In World War II, they were smaller. Yeah, don't go into the military expecting comfort. Not going to happen.
The most space is the one on the top because there's not an actual ceiling, it's just pipes.
Yeah. I'd rather be on top.
Yeah.
I would rather not be on the bottom for dozens of reasons. It takes a special kind of person to be in the Navy. It really does. And I thought about it. That's the service I wanted to join. I don't know if I could have done it. I think it would have claustrophobia would have gotten to me. Then again, I was young. I was more adaptable. What?
Are you claustrophobic?
At times. It depends on the circumstance. I'm also acrophobic at times, but I love going to the top of skyscrapers. So it depends on the circumstance. Yeah, that's
really random. But at Taekwondo, we were talking about how like I don't really get dizzy very much because we were doing a bunch of spinning kicks. And then my master, he's Korean, and so he was like, okay, I want you to go like this, and look down and plug your nose, and then just spin 20 times. And I was like, okay, because I was like, this is gonna be fine. I stood up. It was
he taught you humility, didn't he?
Well, no, it wasn't just me. It was like this other kid. Not like he was like. I'm not dizzy, but everybody was like, weird.
Yeah.
Just like,
yeah.
But like, the building was like that. Like it was not.
No, I know. I know.
Huh?
I understand.
And yeah, so you just go like this, and then you just like spin it 20 times, looking down.
Back in the Middle Ages, not only did the church counterbalance against the state in terms of reducing the harsh effects of royal decrees, but the church provided charity. In fact, churches today still provide charity, even in welfare states. So in bad times, you could go to the church. Now, the Christian message has developed over time to adapt. It was an underground church under Roman oppression. Then it became the official Roman church. Then it became a church for barbarians. Then it became a church for the civilized Middle Ages. The church has morphed to meet and speak to the people of different ages. The church today is different than the church was 50 years ago or 200 years ago. And by the church, I mean any Christian denomination. They've all had to adapt to some extent. Think about being a minister or a priest in an industrial town. You're used to dealing with the problems of farmers. And now you have most of your people, most of your flock, most of your parishioners working in this factory. You don't really understand the factory. They're just learning how to deal with the factory. They've got entirely different problems. The church is not going to be able to meet their needs as well as they otherwise might because the church doesn't understand their needs. There's a learning curve. It takes time to understand this new way of life. So not only has the church's influence been reduced because of the Protestant Reformation, but the church's influence is further reduced, at least in certain respects, during the period of early industrialism when priests and ministers didn't genuinely understand how they could help their people. Eventually they figure it out, but it takes time, and it makes the church more on the edge rather than in the center of life. Now, Charles Dickens, the famous British writer, who I hate, he got paid by the word. If you ever, and you will read Dickens before you graduate high school, it's expected.
Right now.
Ah! What book?
Tilted
But no.
Anyway, good for you. He got paid by the word. I am not a fan of Dickens. But Dickens, for better or worse, was a social commentator. What Dickens was doing was trying to show his readers what life was like for people in distress and for people in poverty and for people pressed. So Dickens's works are works with a social conscience. Or another way of saying that is Dickens dragged his readers through the muck and mire of early industrialism and the stresses thereof. Yeah.
Miss Kirsch said that he didn't get paid by the word, and that was a myth.
It's a great myth, and I'm going to stick with it. He got paid by the page, I think. He did get paid, to my knowledge, by the size of contribution that he
Is that
made.
why he writes so many descriptions?
Yes,
Oh,
it is. That's the point.
so
Look, one of my favorite authors, J.R.R. Tolkien, is also very descriptive, but it's not because he was going to get paid more by having 5 pages of descriptions about the history of the sea elves. Which is interesting history, by the way. They're called the Teleri. In any event, no, it's because the Dickens got paid. To my understanding, Miss Kirsch may know more. She's an English teacher. I'm not. But to my understanding, it's my wife's understanding, and she also is an English teacher. He got paid by the size of his contribution. Okay. But I could be wrong. Also, I don't like demytholizing things. I like myths. I think myths are good. I think myths tell a truth that facts may not. Yes. Think about that one. Quickly. I've got things to say.
Yeah, sorry, I was thinking about what you said.
Okay.
Anyway, I feel like descriptions to a certain degree can be helpful, but when it's just like, as there was a panel on the side of the wall that was just a little bit out of place, I feel like that's really unnecessary.
Well, he's trying to indicate the askew nature of the world. If you want to read something wonderful, read Moby Dick by Herman Melville. It took me a decade to read it, and I like whaling. I'm interested in it. I like Melville's other works. And Moby Dick is by far his greatest, but it is a slog. And you will learn everything about the economics of whaling in the 1840s and 50s, more than you'll ever want to know. Yes?
With Haley, as far as the description, the only other problem with that is he turns dialogue into description. That was the other area that gets so annoying.
Yeah. Now, I have avoided Dickens like the plague since I was in high school because not a fan.
Wait, so the fact that he got paid, is that the only reason why you dislike him, or are there other reasons?
No, first of all, I'm not a left-leaning, bleeding-heart liberal who cares too much about the plight of the poor. My attitude is that most people are poor in their life at some point or another, and that most people can work their way out of poverty. Certainly in the United States, I think that that's the case. So I don't want to hear him harping on about how horrible life is for the downtrodden. I know that. I've been downtrodden. I'm just interested in other things. Honestly, my literature is not what the English teachers say is high literature, because they love the social commentary stuff, because most of it's left-leaning. I like Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, I like Frank Herbert's Dune, I like science fiction, I like fantasy, and I like history. Those are the things I read. So for my part, no, reading about Philip Pirrip and his great expectations does not appeal in any way. I'd sooner read the Bronte sisters or take a hammer to my fingers and smash the joints. What is it, Jane Eyre with zombies or something? That I might watch. But I think it was Jane Eyre. It was one of them. They decided to combine a Bronte novel with zombies. What?
Yeah.
Wasn't it Prejudice?
Pride and Prejudice with zombies. Yes, that was it. Okay. So literature is intended to deal with this new reality. Scientific understanding is also going off into cloud cuckoo land as far as most people are concerned. Charles Darwin makes his journeys on the Beagle, and he goes to the Galapagos Islands, and he posits that life is like clay on a potter's wheel, and that the situations of life prune out the less adapted forms and shape life, again, like clay on a potter's wheel, into a particular mold. One of the great examples of Darwinism I teach my ancient students, which you may or may not remember from last year, is about a type of Japanese crab. In the 1200s, there was a battle near the island of Shikoku, one of the home islands of Japan. But the two clans of samurai chose to meet on an open seaway rather than on land. So it was a rare naval battle in Japanese medieval history. And thousands of samurai are killed on both sides. The fishermen start noticing crabs that they harvest from this area of the sea that have a certain type of carapace that has this strange pattern in the chitin that looks something like that. Now, that looks like a Japanese samurai's mask. Their helmets had masks that went over their face, and the masks were designed to look like oni, which are Japanese demons or Japanese ogres, sort of these horrific faces. And the crabs had that look. Now, in Japan, a samurai in the Middle Ages could kill anyone for any reason who was lower class. I got a new sword. I wanted to test its edge. Bye-bye, fisherman's head. And they did stuff like this.
That's awesome.
Also, the Japanese, although they were primarily and still are primarily of Shinto belief, had taken on Buddhism, which meant that there was a belief in reincarnation. So the fishermen began to think these crabs are reincarnated samurai. If the samurai discover that we're harvesting the souls of their dead brother samurai, they'll wipe us out. So hold back. So for the last 800 plus years, in this part of Japan, fishermen have been throwing back crabs that have carapace, that have shapes on their carapace, on their exoskeleton, that look like a stylized Japanese samurai's battle mask. Consequently, this makes up the majority of crabs in that part of the coastal waters of Japan. It is a survival characteristic. It has nothing to do with natural adaptation. It has to do with the way human beings fish. Life is sculpted like that, according to Darwin. But Darwin's world is pitiless, unchristian. It is a war without mercy, without surrender, without prisoners. It is a war to extinction between species for scarce resources, to have the opportunity to breed and feed your children. You must thrive at the expense of another. I believe that God works through the evolutionary process. It's my own belief. You certainly don't have to agree with it. But the thought of evolution without God doesn't make sense to me, number one. I don't think you accidentally get intelligent life just by rolling the dice randomly for millions of years. Doesn't make sense. But the thought that reality is nothing more than an accident, and the only thing that matters is breeding and survival and everything else, no, to me that's a return to savagery. That's an abandonment of civilization. It's an abandonment of human dignity. I don't believe it. And I oppose that idea. But Darwin's ideas are incredibly controversial. They certainly violate seventh-day creationist notions that believe that the Bible is literally talking about 7 days. So Darwin is frequently lampooned as saying, oh, you're saying I have a monkey for an uncle? You're saying I have an ape for an ancestor? Well, you may have an ancestor ape, Darwin, but I don't. I'm a child of God. There is a connection between Darwin's ideas and some of the worst crimes of the 20th century, because both the communists and the National Socialists are unchristian. The communists are overtly atheistic, and they say, you and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals. And the National Socialists may mouth some Christian ideas, but they're not Christian. In fact, members of the German SS, Hitler's elite black shirts, when they got married in a neo-pagan, Germanic pagan ceremony. They were not Christians. Hitler was no Christian. So, Darwin's ideas are used as an excuse for people being really terrible to one another, even for genocide. The idea is that human evolution says that the Germans must crowd out the Jews. The Jews are cancer. kill the cancer, kill the Jews. And the healthy tissue, ruled by the super race, the Übermenschen, the German master race, will rule the world. That's what they sold. So they used Darwin to justify totalitarianism and genocide. Quick.
Oh, when you were talking about the crabs, it reminded me, when I was in Florida, we went to this, the day before, we went to, this house that had a really pretty view of the ocean. I guess it was the Gulf. And then when we went on Harbor Walk, we went on, this thing where we get to pick up shells. And we went, on the edge of that same house, and there were, so many crabs just all over the wall with different shells. So cool.
It is. My wife grew up on the coast of Maine, so she got to go walking for seashells whenever she wanted. It was neat. She still likes it, and it's one of the things she misses by being out here. Okay. The scope and nature of trade and of free trade is, I'll explain it simply. You don't need a pharaoh or a king or a czar or a kaiser to do business. You invest, get investors, you get the money you need to start your business, you give it a try. My stepfather wanted to run a restaurant, was his dream. And around the time he married my mom, second marriage to both of them, he started his restaurant, and it failed. Like most restaurants, within the first 6 months. Because restaurants tend to be undercapitalized. In other words, they don't tend to have enough money to run for a couple years without making a profit, which is what restaurants really need to do, unless they just catch fire right away. Most of the time it takes 3 or 4 years for a restaurant to become profitable. You don't need permission. You don't need to do paperwork, except for your investors. You don't need to worry about a bunch of bureaucratic regulations. The government that governs best governs least is the basic principle of the free market. And free trade is you buy and sell at market prices. I love it, I'm speaking sarcastically, when teachers whinge about how little they're paid. Oh, it's not fair! Who the heck said life was fair? It's not.
Who the heck?
What a person is paid is what the market will bear. Enough people are willing to do the job of teaching for the salaries that they offer, so they get people. In fact, there are usually more people who want to teach than there are teaching jobs. And this is true for doctors, lawyers, architects, everyone else. You don't pay what you're worth, or you don't get paid what you're worth. You get paid what the market will bear. You don't buy something for what it's worth in some moral economic sense. You buy something for what you can get away with paying for. The market comes up with a system of prices that is enough for the seller to make a living and low enough for the buyer to be willing to part with cash in order to get the product or service. That is the natural operation of market forces. And a free market has a certain quality, just like a living being. Free markets respire. There are boom times where the market is bullish, where everyone's investing and the economy's growing and there's more business and there's more work than anyone can shake a stick at. And then there's too much product in the market and suddenly the market exhales. It's recession, it's depression, people get laid off, and the economy slows down. And in the free market, you're always between boom and bust. That's one of the characteristics of the free market. One of the criticisms that socialists and communists have is that the free market's ups and downs are just too cruel to abide, that human beings should shield each other from the cycle of boom and bust. Industry is going to become involved in a number of issues that deal with imperialism because of strategic materials. Oh, for example, the British take the rubber tree from South America and transplant it on the Malay Peninsula. And most of the world's rubber comes from the Malay Peninsula today, from Malaysia. Why? Because it was good business. The British Empire protected the businessmen who did this. So empires, European empires, will begin trying to conquer parts of the world that will give them specific products. I'm going to leave most of this. Pollution. My grandmother and her family, around 100 years ago, would go from the Bronx, New York City, up to Vermont to work in the summertime. And they could bring their kids. So they went on a steam train from New York City up to Brattleboro, Vermont, White River Junction. In those days, you didn't travel dressed down in sweats or pajamas like some nimrods do on aircraft today. You dress up to travel. You dress up. So my grandmother, little girl, had a little white linen dress that her family got her. Irish linen, very beautiful. So they get on the train in Manhattan, and they go out, up into the countryside, and by the time they arrive at their destination at White River Junction, Vermont, her dress is gray. I mean medium gray. Why? Because the coal smoke from the steam engine went in through the open windows, because they didn't have air conditioning, they didn't even have fans. They opened the windows and took the breeze when the train was moving. Coal dust is so small, it can get between the fibers of a dress like that. It can get between the fibers of your shirt. It's very difficult to clean out. And it can get into the pores of your flesh. Coal miners tend to have a grayish pallor because of the coal dust. And it's not like you can scrub it out. Usually it takes about 5 years for a person's hands to recover from doing coal mining work, because it takes that long for the pores to work out all the dust and for the skin to regenerate enough so that there's no more coal dust deeply embedded in it. What this means is that coal dust goes everywhere. Not everyone had screens on their windows, but a screen wouldn't stop coal dust. When it's a bad day, dust fills the house. Dust is in everything you drink and everything you eat. It's in every bit of clothing you wear. You try cleaning yourself off, but it's in the water. It's in the air. You dry yourself off. It's in the towels you dry yourself off with. So the pollution is pervasive, but it's not just coal dust. You've got noise. Remember how quiet the pre-industrial world is? Not anymore. You've got light at all times, at all hours. Sometimes the factory needs to be lit up. With electricity, it's even more. Now, if you live in a mill town or a factory town or a company town, a town owned where your housing and stores are owned by the company, you're constantly under supervision. You've got no freedom. You've got no way out. You're there. You're on the company's radar all the time. And everything you buy and everything you sell is going to make the company a profit. All of this produces trauma. Trauma on a basic level. I can't sleep because I'm so upset. Trauma. I don't know what I am in my life anymore. Trauma. I don't know if God is in his heaven and all is right with the world. Trauma. Because with this new unprecedented way of life, you go from a hard life on the farm that is known into a new kind of urban life that is at least as hard. With crowding, with filth, where your job is not to work out under the open air, digging turnips, but to do this all day long at your workstation, fast enough to make the tally without stopping. What are you, a meat puppet? Are you a puppet made out of meat? Are you a cog in some giant machine? Or are you a man? Are you a child of God? People were not comfortable in their own skin. Like victims of sexual assault today, they are literally not comfortable inside their own skin. Because what has been done to them is so horrific until they find a way of dealing with it. It's like they want to leave their body. The world of the factory, of the steam engine, of coal, of production, of crowding into these rooms, of constantly smelling other people, and it brings an existential doubt and trauma to almost everyone who experiences it. If you have never been and spent time in a large city, this is all going to seem very hyperbolic, overstated. But if you go, whenever I go to the Bronx to see my old home, the air thrums with the sound of millions of people around me, with the sound of hundreds of thousands of machines all within earshot. Everything from jetliners flying into LaGuardia Airport to elevated subway trains working along the tracks, to cars and trucks and buses, the smell of the internal combustion engine and diesel engines, the sounds and smells of people living on top of one another in tenements. It is not like here. The closest it gets here is if you go to a crowded event down at the Lakeside Park on 4th of July. Other than that, it doesn't get like that here. You can see that in Seattle. You can see it in any of the large cities. It is a different way of life. But for us, people have lived like this for long enough. We understand it. We can deal with it. They didn't know how. So the point of all of this is that the trauma of the early industrial era creates a wound. And socialism and communism appears with the overt intent, anyway, of salving and healing that wound. That is the why of the birth of socialism and of communism, the trauma of early industrialism. Questions, comments, thoughts? Okay. Then I don't see any. You can talk quietly among yourselves until dismissal. Remember, you got a quiz tomorrow.
Yay.